There have been many iconic duos on our screens over the years. Batman and Robin, Thelma and Louise, Bert and Ernie. The list is endless, even stretching into the cartoon world with the ever-popular Sylvester and Tweety. Although they both first appeared in the early 1940s, or at least their predecessors who went on to become them did, Sylvester and Tweety didn't actually start together until 1947 in an animated short called Tweety Pie. Tweety himself got his first outing in 1942's A Tale of Two Kitties, albeit as a generic featherless infant bird instead of the yellow canary we all know and love him as today. He was a creation of animator Bob Clampett, who had originally named him Orson before he was renamed to Tweety to reflect the bird's speech impediment. In Bugs Bunny Superstar, Clampett revealed that Tweety's iconic feathers were added to appease the censorship board, who were dissatisfied with a naked bird, even if it was based on one of Bob's own baby pictures. The voice, which was just a sped up version of Bugs Bunny's, remained, however. Sylvester J. Pussycat Sr., yes, that's his full title, first appeared in Notes to You with Elmer Fudd in 1941. A creation of Isidor Fritz Freeling, Sylvester's name was a play on the scientific name for a wild cat, Felis sylvestris. Believe it or not, it was actually in fellow animator Chuck Jones' short from 1948, entitled Scaredy Cat, that Sylvester originally received his name, having previously been referred to, when named, as Thomas. No doubt a nod to the fact that a male cat is often called a tomcat. This in turn originates from a book entitled The Life and Adventures of a Cat, which was published way back in 1760. Before this, male cats were commonly referred to as rams. While not confirmed, it's quite probable that the name was abandoned to avoid litigation with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, who already had a Tom as a lead character in Tom and Jerry. By 1947, Tweety had been completely redesigned by Freeling. Gone was the censor-unfriendly baby pigeon, instead giving him his iconic yellow feathers and adorable big eyes. When teamed with Sylvester and Tweety Pie, their first pairing was such a success that it won Warner Bros. Their first Academy Award for Best Short Subject. Emma Webster, or as we know her better, Granny, was first introduced in 1950's Canary Row as the pair's owner. She has always seemed biased in favour of protecting the smaller of her two pets, even if Tweety often gave as good, if not more, than he'd received. Their dysfunctional family dynamic and Granny's overprotective nature just brings the cartoon together, however, and in the years that followed, whether it was through Merry Melodies, Looney Tunes or other shorts, Tweety and Sylvester's popularity just went from strength to strength. Although Friz Freeling famously stated, "I never knew if a film I was making would be Looney Tunes or Merry Melodies, and what the hell difference would it make anyway?" It's quite obvious there wasn't any less love shown to either series by any of the animators. Despite the fact that the shows were now virtually identical, with characters crossing between them where they were once exclusive to one another, the hits just kept on coming. And during the golden age of the American animation, from the 1940s to the 1960s in particular, Merry Melodies and Looney Tunes were the most popular animated shorts in theatres. In 1957, Sylvester and Tweety once again won the Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film, this time for Birds Anonymous, and as the years have progressed, the Looney Tunes family as a whole has fast become a global phenom. There have been many spin-off series, from the Fabulous Tasmania to the downright wacky Tiny Toon Adventures. They've had music albums, rides at amusement parks, comic books, a ridiculous amount of cuddly toys, and several video games. You really don't have to look very far to find video games starring the Looney Tunes characters. From the first appearance of Taz in the Atari 2600 in 1983, through to the late 90s alone, there were over 50 games created across every console, computer or handheld that would take them, and that doesn't even include ones that were developed but unreleased at the time. Sylvester and Tweety starred in their own game called Cagey Capers on the Sega Mega Drive, and sadly had a game cancelled on the Super Nintendo before Infogrames and Bit Managers had a go at developing a title for the Game Boy Color. Sylvester and Tweety Breakfast on the Run, known as Looney Tunes Twouble in Northern America, is a combination of 2D side-scrolling platformer and faux 3D isometric puzzler, which sees our feline friend aiming to finally get one over on his feathered nemesis. Sadly, the platforming levels of the game seem a bit like they were just an afterthought and can often be completed by simply holding down right on the D-pad and jumping only when absolutely necessary to navigate past the obstacles set in front of you. They've given you so many lives, it's nearly impossible to fail. The puzzle aspect to the game, however, is actually quite good. Much like the platforming levels, here you again play as Sylvester, with your main aim being to catch Tweety as he makes his way through the 5 different levels, solving puzzles or collecting and combining the various items he finds along the way. You begin the game with 15 lives in easy mode, or 10 in hard. I'm sure I'm not the only one who thinks that they missed a trick by not making that 9. Dogs, cats, spikes, balls and more, they all stand in your way. Even Granny, your supposed loving and caring owner, won't think twice about absolutely battering you if she gets close enough. There is no denying that this game is difficult in places, which probably leads to its reputation and public perception of not being one of the better Game Boy Color titles. But to be honest, the puzzle levels are where the true challenge lies. Each time you complete one, your patience and hard work is rewarded by providing you with a password to return to that position of the game in the future should you happen to die, so it's not like you'll never complete it. Sylvester and Tweety is a true learn by dying experience, however, so don't forget to write those passwords down when they are offered to you. Breakfast on the Run's 5 puzzle levels take place in Granny's house, Granny's cellar, the garden, out on the streets and in the toy shop. We know Granny has had several jobs over the years, as everything from a bus driver, nurse and university professor, but she was very clearly on the take, as that house, its cellar and its surrounding gardens are just massive and are all full of obstacles for Sylvester to overcome. Electricity, spikes, dogs and even Granny, who's been armed with a rolling pin and will not hesitate to beat you if you come near her, all lie in your way of completing that ever-evasive goal of catching Tweety. If we take a look at the prototype I have here, the European version, we can immediately see that the cart looks quite different to the finished version of the game. The final label is nowhere to be seen, as it has been replaced by a simple white adhesive label with the words Sylvester Master Candidate scribbled on it. The EEPROM's window have been covered by electrical tape, but the chip itself remains accessible should it need to be reflashed, as was often the case during the development process. The more observant amongst you will have noticed that this Game Boy Color game is in a standard Game Boy shell, and by flipping it over to the back, we see that both sides have been broken and cut off the lower area of the cart. When the final version of Breakfast on the Run was released, it did come out on a backwardly compatible black cartridge, complete with notch in top right hand corner to allow it to fit in and play in the original Game Boy. So it seems that the only reason the game shell was cut here was to allow the development PCB to fit in an empty cart shell that happened to be available. Reuse like this was very common. As always, the main purpose of these videos is to see if any differences exist between prototypes and the final release version of their games. Because the proto I'm looking at here is the European version, I've decided that today I will solely be comparing it to the final version of that release, and not its North American counterpart, Looney Tunes Twouble. It is quite possible that I may miss some of the smaller differences while doing so, but my aim is to show you absolutely anything I do find, and Breakfast on the Run has quite a few changes right from the beginning, so let's get stuck in. After an identical opening sequence involving the Infogrames logo screen, followed closely by the Warner Brothers Interactive Entertainment screen, our prototype completely omits the language selection. Both do have the Sylvester and Tweety screen that follows, however, and also share a common title screen. The player has the choice of selecting game to start playing or options for, you guessed it, the options menu. Here you can choose your difficulty level, easy or hard, turn the music on and off, or enter a password to skip to a point in the game you previously reached, or maybe just managed to find the code for on the internet. Each level password is made up of a combination of 5 cartoon characters, and entering them in the correct order allows you to begin the game at the code's corresponding level. There are separate passwords for easy and hard difficulties, and every correct password entered is accepted on both the prototype and final version of the game, except one, but more on that shortly. The retail version begins with a white screen displaying Tweety is close, hurry, and immediately afterwards we are afforded our first glimpse of the 2D platforming element of the game. The prototype version actually omits both of these completely, and instead skips ahead to the first level's intro screen. While these both look pretty similar, the prototype has an extra exclamation mark after the word missing instead of the full stop, and the seemingly drunken slurring of "where's he's gone" of the final line of text in the proto has been fixed in the retail version. The most glaringly obvious difference here is the absence of the level password, the one I alluded to previously that just didn't work in the prototype version. It is missing completely, and fair enough really, as it just didn't exist. There was no need for it, as there was nothing to skip. It's as if the first platforming level was nothing more than an afterthought. In Granny's House Part 1, the pillow's design is different, with tassels and no shading. Another room is a sardine can missing from the corner, and the pillow has been replaced completely by feathers. A room has a different layout where a plant pot is needed to exit, and the dog's AI tracks you much more closely. As will become a common theme throughout the game, several more sardine cans are once again missing. Between the first 3D and 2D stage, we are shown another white screen, with the prototype erroneously displaying Granny's House Part 1 instead of Part 2. These 2D stages are pretty much identical to the finished version, but the difficulty settings seem slightly higher in the proto version. Granny's cellar has several rooms missing sardine cans. Maybe the prototype was made before Granny went grocery shopping. 2 other areas have different coloured pipes before once again Granny earns eggs and yet again more sardine cans. Poor Sylvester, no wonder he's pissed off at Tweety. In the garden is an area missing a life-giving heart. The sardines are missing from one area but present in another area where the final version has none but does have a heart in their stead. Many more missing sardine cans follow, as does a dog that's much more aggressive in tracking you. Sardines have once again gone missing, and right before the end there's even a difference in the level's layout. Out in the Street Part 1's intro screen declares metal and wood make a big bang instead of wood make a big bang of the final version. It should surprise no one that the stray cats out in the streets seem to have up and thieved several sardine cans, and an extra one, a cat that is, even pops up at one stage during the level to make your task of traversing the game yet more difficult than the final version. The final levels of the game, both faux 3D and 2D, are set in the toy shop, and Part 1's intro screen seems to find it less daunting, with several full stops instead of an exclamation mark. Guess what? Here yet again more sardine cans are missing in several places. I know, I was shocked too. Later a spool of thread seems to look more like a duck than the twine or thread it represents, before another room is a movable box where the final version is the same box already in place in the corner. More sardines are missing elsewhere, as is yet another life art, and a cameo by Marvin the Martian is removed completely in the final game. At the end of the game you do finally manage to catch, or as put in the game, find Tweety. In the prototype you get a face full of dynamite for your pleasure, followed by a screen displaying "Congratulations, you've found Tweety," and a nice heartwarming picture of both characters. This picture was omitted in the release version, and you also have to wait until after the text for Sylvester to succumb to his dynamite exploding fate. This in turn is followed by another screen claiming Puddy Tats really get blown away by this game, something that is missing completely in the prototype. They instead originally had Sylvester and Tweety giving each other a huge thumbs up while relaxing on the beach, with equally odd text of "too bad for Sylvester" though written underneath, appearing before the game's credits begin to roll. When they do, Bruno Bonnell has gained an extra L at the end of his name in the final version of the game, but otherwise remain the same until the end, where extra time and button presses are required to return to the initial Sylvester and Tweety startup screen. I chose to glance over this earlier, but Sylvester and Tweety Breakfast on the Run is a true learn from dying experience. Those passwords that are provided to you throughout the game are absolutely essential here, sadly. You see, despite the fact that the prototype recognises and accepts exactly what level, both in easy or hard, these should bring you to. These level codes do absolutely nothing for you in the unfinished game. No matter what code is entered, the result is exactly the same. You must always start right back at the first level of the game. I'm lucky enough to know the exact history of the prototype I have here. It was passed around as a review copy to more than one magazine in Europe before its launch. It even had an earlier destination. It was sent to Spacco as a test copy for them to try before possible distribution to the Spanish and Portuguese gaming markets. You see, Spacco once had exclusive Nintendo distribution rights in those regions and often decided on what games would and wouldn't suit their PAL B market. In short, it pretty much decided what games were released in the PAL B region. A license like Sylvester and Tweety, something that was already a household name, was a no-brainer and pretty much a sure thing when it came to sales. One thing that stood out when looking at relevant reviews of the game from that time was that the images used in printed media were mainly from the first level Granny's house and its following 2D level. I can't confirm this 100%, but in my mind I have an image of all the different reviewers sitting there frustrated by the non-working level codes and just declaring, screw it, images from the first level will do, they'll get the idea. What I can say with 100% certainty is that 1997 and 1998 were busy times for Infogrames and Bit Managers respectively. The cult classic V-Rally, a game that I'll be discussing at another time, was released on the PS1 and its success meant that it was being ported to several other systems, seeing its release on both the Game Boy and Nintendo 64 in 1998. Similarly, Bit Managers are extremely busy with several other titles, mainly the Turok franchise, with work on the sequel beginning shortly after the initial game's release. In short, if the platform levels seem as if they were added on after the fact, it's because they were. A way of easing you into your next puzzle scenario, sure, but their main purpose was to add depth to an otherwise short game. I mean, sure, it was hard at times, but once you figure out how to avoid getting hit unnecessarily, at a mere 5 levels in length, it was a pretty brief encounter. Similarly, the addition of sardine cans and extra lives to the final version were to prolong your gaming experience and get you through those tricky areas. Being a franchise based on well-known cartoon characters, Bit Managers and Infogrames felt the game's audience was always going to be a younger demographic. They needed to aim for just the right balance of difficulty and replayability, and who doesn't love a password system that allows you to jump right in just where you left off. While dated looking now, Breakfast on the Run received positive reviews from game critics at the time, and while it's often criticised now for its unforgiving hit radius, especially on hard, I actually grew to appreciate it as the clever little puzzle platformer it truly is. The game at its core is a genuine retro isometric 3D style puzzler, and it's done with a certain confident swagger. It may not be as wacky or as fast moving as the cartoons we all know and love, but it definitely evokes the frustration Sylvester had to endure in never capturing his feathered foe. Tweety is always that one step ahead.